Welcome to week 12 of the NFL season. This is the War Room powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. I'm Jeff Ratcliffe back in the saddle, and with me, Pat Thorman. Pat, we didn't get our usual pre-show powwow, so how you doing today, my man?
I'm doing good. Shook off the turkey hangover, and luckily this morning has been pretty standard as far as injuries and stuff. Nothing too surprising yet. So yeah, feel ready to go.
Yeah, it's been a rough couple weeks for fantasy purposes, at least for daily for me. I have struggled a bit, but the best part about daily is you just keep going, and ups and downs, peaks and valleys, but ultimately you make the right plays in the long run, and things work out well. At least that is the idea. And yeah, you're right. There isn't much in terms of injury news that is really shaking up the world. I mean, we have a few things to maybe get through really quickly here before we start to address the start-sit questions. Obviously, the big news, we have a lot of running back shakeups here and giving us a lot of value, actually, at the running back position. Devontae Freeman not going to be active. We knew that one was going to be the case. So we get Tevin Coleman in, and obviously Coleman with a lot of upside, but certainly not to the caliber of player that Freeman is. But intriguing, so not bad there. Then we, of course, also have the Charcandrick West situation. Really unlikely that he's going to play. I mean, it's not completely ruled out at this point. But, Spencer Ware, not the same type of player, Pat. And I actually want to start with him. I mean, your thoughts and expectations for Spencer Ware today. Obviously, we should see some Niall Davis as well against the Bills. The Bills not as stout of a defense as we once thought they were. So what do you think about this guy today?
Well, he's definitely interesting. I mean, he's certainly cheap, across the daily sites, and it did just came out that West is out.
Okay.
So Ware should get the lion's share of those touches. My one concern is I think that game is going to be pretty much a clock suck. I mean, both teams go super slow pace, and you're not going to take a lot of chances downfield. We know that, especially with Alex Smith. Tyrod Taylor's playing hurt. The weather's not supposed to be that hot. So it's going to be a game that probably grinds pretty quickly. So if he does lose even 30%, 20% of the touches to Niall Davis, his volume is a little bit of a concern. But I mean, for the price, he certainly should be able to pay off on daily sites.
Yeah, and you look to the over-under of 41 in this game, so it's not a game that you really want to rely on heavily, but you look at that price, it's really hard to pass up across the board, and that's the beautiful thing this week. If you're playing DFS, you can get away with putting in, I mean, Rawls is about as chalk as it gets. You start with Rawls and you go from there. Rawls, Hopkins, and then what else, right? But you get Rawls in there, you get Ware in there, or if you have a flex spot, this week, Tevin Coleman, TJ Yeldon. I mean, there's so many running backs this week who are cheap that you can really just build a nice lineup that has a decent floor for cash game purposes. So that's obviously a big deal. The wide receiver situation in New England is something else I wanted to touch on, Pat, before we get into these questions. Sounds like Keyshawn Martin's going to play in this one. Obviously, we know we have Brandon LaFell there. We have Chris Harper, who I think is a really intriguing young player, potentially high ceiling, and he could be in that Amendola, Edelman role in this offense. But, of course, Mother Nature may not be cooperating with us. There's snow expected in this matchup, and we know that the Broncos their cornerbacks are near elite level. They probably have arguably the best trio of corners in the league. So that's not good, but then again, they may not be able to generate a lot of pressure. DeMarcus Ware also going to be out again in this one. So I guess your thoughts and expectations for the Patriots wide receivers this week.
Oh, I mean, it is a tough game to figure in general. At first, my thought was maybe they would go with some 3 tight end sets, leave just LaFell out there for wide receiver, but Michael Williams isn't active, their best kind of blocking in-line tight end. So that's kind of out the window. I think they signed Asante Cleveland off of their practice squad. He's more of a pass catcher. But it's like you said, it's tough with the Denver defensive backs, you're not going to get a lot of separation. There is going to be some weather. So I think the Patriots are probably going to play it as close to the vest, try to go with as much power as they can, use blunt as long as the game is close. I don't see them being able to really spread them out unless they're doing it with tight ends. And I'm not sure that's really the way that they're going to go. It's not a game that we should be targeting it very much in daily, other than Brady's ownership should be low, Gronkowski's ownership should be low, and you figure that he's the best bet for them to move the ball, but Denver knows that too. So that's a GPP only play for me. We want to get a little bit of exposure because his ownership would be low, and a guy like Gronkowski can bust 2 touchdowns at the drop of a hat.
Yeah, and something interesting to note here, over the last 4 games, Denver given up the 7th most fantasy points per game to running back. So that's kind of intriguing, an interesting little trend that you wouldn't necessarily realize. But Blount, an interesting guy in this matchup for DFS purposes. We know his ceiling is obviously massive, but again, his floor is kind of low as well. So as we're waiting on some of the inactive news to come in, let's hit up some of these questions. And actually, the first question from George here is an IDP question that really has inactive implications. He's asking, between Jason Pierre-Paul, Robert Quinn, or Everson Griffin, who would I start? Robert Quinn hasn't practiced yet this week, and I would not be surprised if he's inactive here. Even if he's active, we saw him active 2 weeks ago, play 15 snaps, so he's just too risky. I'm going to go with Pierre-Paul. I think the ceiling is really high, and I'm hoping to see him playing without that club on his hand so he can grasp it, and maybe his tackle total jumps up a little bit there. But I do like Pierre-Paul. But let's go to Lee's question. And Lee, we did have a great Thanksgiving, so thank you, sir, for that. He needs a running back and a flex in a PPR format. He's got Rawls, Ivory, Gore, Blue, John Brown, Michael Floyd. And he said he's thinking Rawls and Ivory. Pat, I don't know about you, but I'd have to agree with that. Now, Ivory's PPR ceiling isn't necessarily very high with Bilal Powell on this roster now and active and healthy. But we mentioned this before the show. The number 1 matchup for running backs over the last 4 weeks is the Dolphins. Dolphins still dealing with a banged-up Jelani Jenkins. They've been pretty porous and trending downward since losing Cameron Wake. Cameron Wake, an underrated run defender as well. So I actually like that. I think Rawls is a lock this week. But your thoughts here?
Yeah, I agree. Both are in my top 10 running backs for the week. And the game script is going to favor Ivory. You'd think they're favored. They're at home. He's done very well under those conditions. And like you said, the matchup is pretty sweet. So Ivory and Rawls is I'm pretty confident in that.
Yeah, over that span. So we're talking the last month. They're giving up 4.7 yards per carry, which is pretty good. Last I checked. 118 attempts faced as well, so that is a really big number. That leads all teams over the last month. Now, keep in mind there are some bye weeks in there for some of these teams as well, but yeah, I do like Ivory this week as a strong. I'd say maybe back end RB1, or you could call him an upside RB2 or borderline RB1, whatever you want to say, but right in that area of the conversation. Troy is dealing with a RB problem, and hey, welcome to the club. But he's saying pick 3 between Yeldon, Buck Allen, Blue, Hillman, Andrews, and Coleman, and it is a PPR format. I don't think this is a problem at all. I think you're in a good situation. You go Yeldon, Allen, and Coleman, and you call it a day. I think that's the route I'd go, Pat.
Yeah, it's certainly Yeldon and Allen. Blue to me is a little bit interesting, at least on daily. If you want to fade the Texans' passing game a little bit, if you think that the bye week and the new defensive coordinator is going to make a little bit of a difference, if you just want to get away from the crowd, not many people are going to be on Blue. They're all going to be on Hoyer and Nuke Hopkins. So if there's a scenario there, if you want to stack Blue with the Texans' defense, that's a good contrarian way to go. But in this case, in a seasonal format, I would say Coleman is the call over Blue.
All right, so we'll move to Joshua here, who has to decide between Marvin Jones and Brandon LaFell. This one's tough, at least for the matchup for LaFell, but I am still going to play him here just because The volume should be there, and it is still Tom Brady. We can't forget about that. There are certain players who, are a little less susceptible to these bad matchups than others, and Brady would certainly fit the bill there. LaFell is the top target in this offense other than Rob Gronkowski now. So I think I'm going to lean that way, Pat.
Yeah, they're both down, in the 30s with my rankings, but LaFell's toward the top of that bracket. They're supposed to be an inch or two or three of snow on the field. A lot of times that gives the advantage to the offense. The receiver knows which way he's going, the defensive back doesn't. Brady and LaFell have a pretty good rapport. And apparently Bill Belichick's 12-0 in snow games in his career. So if you buy into that kind of narrative, Patriots are going to score some points. You think that Jones is a boom or bust guy, but they should be up. I don't know how much they're going to be throwing late in the game on St. Louis. So I think LaFell is the way to go as well.
All right, so we are getting some inactive news coming through here. So let's start with the Giants and Redskins. Take a look at this game here. Prince Amukamara is going to be active. So is Wani Unga on the defensive side of the ball. So there are IDP implications here. Amukamara, a CB1, DB2. So if you're in cornerback required leagues, he is arguably the top cornerback for tackle purposes. Just really, really productive. And the Redskins' home crew has been very favorable. Wani Unga, last time we saw him when John Beeson wasn't playing, he was playing every down. So that to me is intriguing. I don't think I'm going to start Wani Unga, but I am going to pick him up in leagues where he's available in those deeper formats because he was productive. He didn't play particularly well, but he was productive as a tackler. Otherwise, nothing really of note on that side. And then moving to Washington, we'll see, Alfred Morris a little banged up, but he is going to play in this one. I mean, I don't know how crazy I am about him. We'll see D'Angelo Hall active, but remember this cornerback situation is pretty brutal. Chris Culliver now on IR for the Redskins. Also, Keenan Robinson inactive. So is Trenton Robinson. And Trent Robinson, a lot of people don't realize or know who he is, but he's been a pretty solid asset for them at the strong safety position. That opens things up. This could be a rout. So, Pat, I mean, I guess your general thoughts about this matchup, I mean, what do you think about Odell Beckham Jr. here? Is there anything to like? Obviously we have Deshaun Jackson back and healthy. Is there anything to like on the Washington side?
Well, the Washington side is a little bit tricky, especially with the perimeter cornerbacks playing pretty good football for the Giants. If I'm on the Redskins, it's going to be on Jordan Reed on the interior. Maybe take a shot on Chris Thompson in a PPR site like DraftKings. He's super cheap. The game script should favor the Giants, which would have the Redskins throwing toward the end of the game. He can pile up some garbage time points. But as far as New York goes, all in on Odell Beckham. I think Eli's got a good matchup as well. If you want to try that Rube life and go with Ruben Randall, that's always a tricky one. But he has a good matchup as well. It's tough to figure out their running backs. They have that four-headed monster going, so you're kind of throwing darts there. So if you want to play the Giants, I would certainly do it through the passing game.
Yeah, and we look to the matchup, and I'm glad you brought up Jordan Reed. He's a guy who, hey, we've relied on pretty consistently throughout the year in daily, but I think he's getting overlooked a little bit this week. A lot of people are on Barnage. I mean, Gronkowski, if you want to pay up for him, of course. Hearing a little chatter for Delaney Walker, obviously against the Raiders, you like that. But take a look at this matchup. The Giants giving up the fourth most fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks here, so they have been getting torched, and really the deficiencies on the the interior of the linebacker core, and then of course Landon Collins really not playing up to snuff, at least early on in his career here. That tells me Jordan Reed, fire him up. I have some exposure to him in some GPPs today. I think he's a really strong play that you might be able to differentiate a little bit from the crowd. We have Raiders-Titans information. So, of course, the game of the week, Raiders-Titans. Not much on the Raiders side, seeing inactive Nyron Ball. Otherwise, not. And half your people are like, who? Tywan Jones also going to be inactive. I know some people had fired him up at various points in the season in deep leagues. But the Titans, I think, is the more interesting side, Pat. We have Kendall Wright active, so curious your thoughts on him. Maybe just curious your thoughts across the board on this matchup. The Raiders haven't been good against the tight end. They haven't been good against the run, so maybe Antonio Andrews, a little Kendall Wright mixed in there as well. What are your thoughts today about this game?
Yeah, it's funny with the interest in the Raiders in general has kind of fallen off the cliff the last couple of weeks with the way they've been playing, and that kind of coincides with the way their run defense is playing because their run defense played pretty well at the beginning of the season, and so that kind of spurs a script where teams are throwing against them because their defensive backs are weak, and like you mentioned, they can't cover tight ends. So if they can get their run defense shored up a little bit, and Tennessee certainly doesn't have a dominant running game to begin with. Could force Mariota into a more of a passing stance. Like you mentioned, Walker's got a great matchup. Kendall Wright's back. He should soak up some targets as well. And maybe Dorial Green-Beckham gets involved, and they all have plus matchups. So this is a game that it could grind back and forth and be a 17-20 game, or it could kind of shoot out. If the Raiders' run defense comes to play, there is some sneaky shootout potential. A Mariota Delanie Walker stack is pretty cheap on FanDuel, and you can do some pretty sexy things with the rest of your roster.
Yeah, this is a fun week. I keep going back to lineups and tweaking them, and it's been a lot of fun putting them together just because of the values you can get this week. And also, too, if you're playing on Yahoo, don't forget about that. You can certainly sign up through our link, too, by the way. But Yahoo was really difficult this year because their quarterback pricing was just a little too high, but they've seemed to adjust that a little bit in recent weeks. Like, for example, this week you're able to get somebody like Russell Wilson in your lineup at $28. Ordinarily, he would have been in the $34, $35 range, and it's just too much. Remember, it's a $200 cap over there, so you can do some fun stuff there this week. Looking at this Saints-Texans game, and I'm not seeing anybody really popping out who's inactive. Ingram banged up, but he's going to play. Willie Snead's going to play. But is this a track meet for you, Pat? Are you trying to take advantage of that? I mean, we know the Brian Hoyer talk all week with the DeAndre Hopkins talk, but people are maybe overlooking the other side. Brandon Cooks could be interesting play, little synergy in the lineup if you are looking at this for daily purposes.
Yeah, there are certainly some ways that you can differentiate, or cut the chalk a little bit because everyone's going to have Hopkins. A lot of people are going to have Hoyer. You can get Nate Washington in there, and he's got a better cornerback matchup. He's going to get Brandon Browner, and Brandon Brown is pretty accommodative to opposing receivers. So that's one way you can differentiate a little bit. There's not much of a tight end to speak of on Houston. Which is unfortunate because the Saints have been giving up a lot. But then you flip around to the other side. Not much talk on Mark Ingram, and he's a guy who's always always in play in tournaments. He's pretty heavily involved when he's feeling well, which apparently he's healthy. So he's an interesting guy. If you want to stack the game with Houston's passing game, New Orleans rushing attack, and like you mentioned, Cooks has been playing great lately as well. So there's a lot of possibilities here. Just realize that you're not going to be sneaky if you have Hoyer and Hopkins. You might want to differentiate in tournaments.
Yeah, that's why you go Josh McCown, Brian Hartline. You heard it here first.
Hartline.
Yes, sir. There's nobody else. Nobody else. And we know he has 2 touchdown upside. And he's like a penny pretty much on every site. So that'll let you certainly differentiate and open you up to be able to put some other players in your lineup. Look into this Miami Jets game. Jarvis Landry is going to be active, and of course, Darrelle Revis inactive with that concussion. Nothing else really of note that stands out in terms of inactive players here, but this is intriguing. So we have Landry. He went DNP limited DNP. That's never a good thing. But now he has this great matchup. And Pat, I know, I'm trying to get this guy in lineup season long. Obviously, you're playing him, but do you like him for daily purposes this week?
I do have him in a couple of DraftKings lineups in the full PPR. I'm not playing him on FanDuel. I think with Revis out, it's interesting is that all of a sudden there's this thought that you want to attack the Jets defense, and they still have a pretty good defense. And they blitz a lot. They almost blitz half the time, and Tannehill is not good against the blitz. He has basically a 63 quarterback rating. So I think that Landry is a huge factor against that. He's going to be probably his number one read when he's getting blitzed. Dump it off on he's got a pretty small A dot, so I think he can soak up some targets. Rashad Matthews was supposedly sick this week, but he's active. I'm not sure they're going to have time to get those downfield routes completed. So I think Landry's the way to go. If you want to throw a dart at Miller and hope that he does some more work in the passing game, because I don't think he's going to be able to run between the tackles very much on the Jets.
Yeah, I'm not sure if George is still in or watching, but hey, George, I was right. Robert Quinn is inactive. That's what I figured we were going to see. So, you're going to want to keep an eye on that. And the big news, Greg Zuerlein inactive. So you're going to get Zach Hawker today. But, obviously that doesn't really matter to anybody. I don't think you'd be relying on him. Moving down the list here, let's take a look at this Chargers-Jaguars game. And, we look to value, Pat, and one of the biggest values here, Malcolm Floyd is going to be active, by the way. Biggest values I've seen this week is Stevie Johnson. He's dirt cheap, and yes, there isn't a massive ceiling with Stevie Johnson, but the target volume should be there. This is a somewhat favorable matchup as well. I don't mind the matchup at all, but, are you as high on him this week? Are you using him? Because he does enable you to do, again, some more fun things in your lineups.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, he's definitely more of a cash game than a tournament play. Like you mentioned, his ceiling really isn't there. But he's like you mentioned, he's super cheap. And most lineup constructions this week are going to be cheap at running back, hitting all those values. One of which is playing in this game in T.J. Yeldon, and then paying up at receiver. If you want to kind of flip that to differentiate your lineup a little bit, Stevie Johnson would be part of that. He would be one of the cheap wide receivers you get, so you can pay up for an Ingram or a Peterson. And in tournaments, even a Gurley. But in general, you expect the Chargers to be throwing the ball. I mean, the Jaguars have a pretty good run defense. I think they're giving up the fewest yards per carry in the league. The Chargers can't run the ball to begin with, so I think Danny Woodhead's in play as well. And they're most likely going to be throwing in the second half of this game. I'm pretty sure the Chargers are going to lose coming from west to east. They have nothing to play for at this point. The Jaguars actually are only 2 games out of first place. They're at home. I think they're going to play a pretty good game. So you kind of want to target the Chargers' passing attack. And on the Jaguar side, I'm definitely on Yeldon. Chargers' run defense is bad. He should get plenty of volume. It's probably when he gets off the schneid and scores a touchdown. I think he's got 1 rushing touchdown on the year. And so that's kind of the way I'm looking at this game.
Yeah, and I do like Yeldon, although, I always, trying to bring up the recent matchup data as opposed to the season long, because the season long can certainly be misleading. I mean, the Chargers standing out as the number 1 matchup for running backs over the course of the season. They're a mid-pack matchup over the last month or so. So, hey, that's something to consider here. They do have Manti Te'o back, and I'm not saying that Manti Te'o is the answer to any question at all, but he's their best linebacker on the interior. He's the best off-ball linebacker they have. Donald Butler just not hacking it, and neither is Denzel Perryman just yet. I think Perryman has a nice future ahead of him, but that at least helps them a little bit. Corey Liuget being active, of course, also is going to help them. But I agree, though. I do have a lot of Yeldon exposure this week, and I'm really looking forward to maybe seeing him find the end zone in my season-long leagues where I've had I guess, a few too many shares of him this year. But looking through, and I'm trying to see if I think we missed one of the Buccaneers and Colts. That's who we did not talk about yet. And Frank Gore is going to be active in this one. Not a surprise, dealing with the ankle injury, but he was getting practice in. But I guess the question here is, are you concerned at all about Frank Gore? The Buccaneers have kind of turned a corner here. They've been playing better defense. They obviously inspired offense with Jameis Winston really doing some impressive things over the second half of the season. He's really rounding into form and justifying that first overall pick. So do you have concerns at all about Frank Gore here? Obviously, we've also seen Ahmad Bradshaw emerge recently. So what are your general thoughts here about the Colts running back situation?
Well, I mean, I think if you have Gore in season long, you're probably playing, and you probably don't have a better option unless you're able to scoop one of these value backs, whether it be Buck Allen or Ware. but it's an interesting spot for the Bucks. They're playing really well, like you mentioned. But now they're going on the road, and they're playing a team that really needs a win. And their pass defense has been kind of masked, of late, but it's still beatable. And so I think it's kind of a sneaky spot for Hilton. I think that Hasselbeck can keep him in the game, keep Gore viable. So I don't see one team getting way out ahead of the other, which is going to keep both running backs viable. And I think Doug Martin's got an excellent matchup as well. So I think it's probably going to be a little bit of a lower scoring game than especially we saw with the Bucks last week against the Eagles. But yeah, I'm fine with Gore. Hope he holds up for the whole game because he should be able to give you a solid day.
Yeah, that's the matchup is definitely intriguing, and Troy has two questions here. He said Griffin listed as questionable. Yes, that is correct. He is active. He's dealing with a hip and shoulder injury, but he's going to be active in this game. Keep in mind Harrison Smith is going to be out in this game. News about that's been out for a couple days though, so no big surprise there. Eric Kendricks active as well. Anthony Barr active. So the defense is almost at full strength, though Smith's presence will be missed. He's been very good this season. But Troy, one last question. He says, in a PPR format, Hearns, Cooper, or LaFell? This one is an easy one for me. It's Amari Cooper. Pat, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm on Cooper as well here. He hasn't really performed lately, so people are kind of souring on it, but he's a guy who can blow up at any minute. The pass defense for the Titans has been playing better, but I still like him better than Hearns in a PPR. Hearns has been dealing with some injuries. I do think that they're not going to be forced to throw very much in the second half if they get up ahead of the Chargers, which I believe they will. So, yeah, Cooper kind of in a landslide here.
Keep in mind, Allen Robinson going to see a lot of Jason Verrett today. That's not good for Allen Robinson. Jason Verrett has been fantastic, kind of justifying that first-round selection from 2014. He's going to be a name to know going forward. Definitely don't want to see him on the other side of your fantasy receivers. So that, I think, will do it for us today. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. This is always a fun, quick sprint to the finish. If you have any other last-second questions, you can certainly get to them on Twitter. Hit us up. Otherwise, best of luck to you today and tomorrow, of course, and we'll be back for Week 13. The playoffs are coming. Good luck to everybody. So for Pro Football Focus, I'm Jeff. He's Pat, and that's a wrap.